Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Let me just see how we're doing here. Hold on. Good. We are on and recording. As you can see, I'm trying to enjoy the last few days of summer here in, what is this? This looks like it's Santa Monica Pier, maybe. Yeah, cool. Hope you're enjoying the last few days of summer too. I guess maybe you'll enjoy them even more when the course is over, and I won't take that personally. All right. As you know, you have an exam coming up this weekend that will finish the course up. Let me go ahead and share that information with you, and then we can stop and see if there's any questions. Yeah, there we go. All right. This is good. Okay. So, yes, it was same deal as last time. You can take it anytime. Well, I guess it will be midnight Thursday, so Friday at 12 a.m. through Sunday at midnight, and you'll be given another 90-minute period to take the exam unless you've been granted extra time through the Student Services Center, and that has been all taken care of for those of you that have asked for that. Same deal as last time, open book. You can use any notes. You know how this works. The 90 minutes is designed to give you some time to look up questions you might have some concerns about, but you have to come in having studied and having studied well in order to do well on the exam. So please do that. It will cover everything since the last exam, which is, what is that? That's going to be touch, and the two chapters on touch, the two chapters on vision, which are on face perception and imitation, which we'll talk about today, and then the chapters on multisensory perception. And then there's a little afterword too that you should read through. Again, it's not cumulative, so it's not based on anything you learned in the first half of the quarter. It's just information from the second half of the quarter. And so it will be everything through what I talk about today. And to remind you, Thursday's lecture will be asynchronous in that it's already been recorded, and I've now posted it. It's worked out well because it's going to be just last year's lecture at the same material, and it has been posted in the playlist from this quarter on YouTube. So that's the name of that lecture if you need it. It's PSYC49Summer21 Lecture8.23.22. As you can see, it was very close to when this lecture would have been on Thursday. And I'll make sure that today I get through everything so that it leaves off pretty much where that lecture starts. And you'll see it's very much the same. It's only last year, so it's not going to be any real difference. It will also cover everything through your discussion section on tomorrow. And tomorrow, Joanne is going to be covering, she's going to be covering multisensory attractiveness and synesthesia. So I think that will be fun for you to go there, and there'll definitely be questions on the exam covering those things. And then all book material since last exam, obviously, as well. Okay, so you know what the exams are like. You've been given tons of questions already. You'll be given 3 more today. I think there might be questions actually provided in the recorded lecture too. I'm not sure, but that's okay. You've been given a lot of questions this quarter, so you know, that should be fine. That should help you out. Let's see if there's anything else I need to remind you of. It looks like, oh, there's some chat questions. Good. Let me go ahead and answer those. Look, how else? How else? Okay, so Isabel's asking, how else should students be prepared? And then she wrote 7. I'm not sure what that refers to. But, you know, you have to do more than attend the lecture, right? You definitely attend the lecture and definitely take notes. But I really recommend that since these are all recorded for you, you go back and go through at least parts of the lectures again and fill in your notes that way. So you have access to all the slides. I haven't really made very many changes at all on the slides. Here and there I have maybe omitted some things, but you have access to all the slides. You might want to print them out. And when you go back and rewatch the lectures for the second time, you should place the notes you're taking now on the slides if you haven't printed them out yet, and then add more notes when you watch the lecture for the second time. Then what you can do is go to the book and look to see what things are covered in the lecture from the book, and maybe fill in some notes there. And then the material that's not covered in the lecture that's in the book, make sure you take notes on that as well. And the same thing should be true of the discussion section material. Make sure you've gone to all the discussions, or if you haven't, you get the notes from somebody else. And do know that there's, I think, at least 8 questions on this exam, this 60-question exam, that will be right from the discussion section that it was not covered in the book or the lecture. Okay, so you have to do more than just attend. Okay, you do have to be active in your studying, and that should probably involve you going back and looking at the lectures again, at least at the parts that you might have had some confusion over. Okay. All right, Isabel, I hope that helps. What other questions do you folks have on the exam? I know there were some folks that were concerned about their last grade on the midterm. So hopefully, if you were concerned that you maybe have gone through the exam to see what you got wrong, maybe talked with Chuan to see if there were things that she could help you with understand better from the last exam or from the current material. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned that I think tomorrow Chuan will leave a little time for you to ask questions. I'll remind her of that. 10 minutes or so, but again, that's not going to be a review session. That's a 10-minute period for you to ask questions. So maybe look through all your notes and go through the book to see what questions you have, and she can help you with that. But you know, it's pretty straightforward. If you're not happy with the grade you got in the last exam, you got to study more, and you got to find ways to study. It's not just attending. It's not just, you know, kind of reading through without being active. You need to be active when you're learning these things. So you take notes, you put things in your own words, you identify problems, confusions in the material, you clarify those issues, and that should put you in better shape if you're concerned about your grade. Okay. Other questions, you can either put them in chat or raise your hand or something like that. Be happy to answer them for you. Okay. Seems like there's nothing now, but if you think of things, feel free to ask. Actually, once we start the material, feel free to ask questions about the material, but if you have questions about the exam, feel free to ask. Maybe after the break, I can answer some more questions about the exam. Okay, great. Then we do have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to have to go a tiny bit faster, but not too fast, because I love this material. I think this is face perception, and then imitation, which I'll be talking about, are some of my favorite topics in the book. I've known a lot about face perception. I've studied face perception in the context of voices and faces and speech, those sort of things. But I didn't know very much about the imitation literature until we had kind of just gotten started in our own lab to test some of those things, which will be discussed, I think, next class in the asynchronous lecture. I'll be talking about those things, and it turned out to be some of my favorite topics for that reason. So we started off with this really kind of fun way of discussing the topic, and that is the uncanny valley. And just we've seen this slide already, so let me give you all of it. Yes, the idea being that it's been so hard to animate a face to make it look real that, in fact, if it isn't nearly perfect, then people are very aware of kind of the oddness of it, and they feel that the face looks creepy or zombie-like, something like that. And it took so much work for them to try to traverse this uncanny valley. What I mean by traverse is, try to solve the problem, that it possibly was, kind of solved for this one movie. But even, and we talked about some of the details that folks like Steve Prieg had to attend to, such as the eye moisture and how that gets pushed around. But even after solving it, I left off by saying the next movie that they applied this to, which was the Tron movie, the newer version of the Tron movie with Jeff Bridges. I don't think they necessarily solved the problem. I think it was a fairly fake-looking Jeff Bridges. I was watching something last night. I know what it was. The Sandman, right, on Netflix, I believe. And they did some animation of one of the characters' faces at one point. And, it was nice. It was very well done, but boy, it was still noticeable that it wasn't quite right. And that's years, that's what, 12 years after the Benjamin Button movie. So they're still having problems with it. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is because I wanted to make the point that the reason that the uncanny valley is such a problem has to do with your perceptual brain. And that is the fact that your brain is astonishingly sensitive to human faces. Possibly there's no other type of class of visual stimuli that we have more expertise with and more sensitivity to. Okay, why is that the case? Why are faces so important to us? Right? We all, kind of enjoy looking at faces and think about the facial information we believe we can, get from looking at somebody. And sometimes we make assumptions about their personality and things. But I mean, is this something that we're good at? Is this something that the brain seems designed to do? And the answer for both of those questions is surprisingly, yeah, we are pretty good about it. So the reason why our brains might be designed to be so good with faces is because there's probably no class of stimuli in our perceptual world that communicates as much information as quickly as human faces. Nothing communicates as efficiently. So yes, we have the internet, right? You folks, born into it. I watched it develop, and I was very struck by, how much information is available to us so easily, right? There's nothing like it, right? Except when it comes to the efficiency of things, the efficiency of the information. And that's where a human face comes in. So when we glance at a human face, when we are presented a human face and aren't quite sure we've ever seen it, we didn't consciously see it, we still are able to extract information from it, as you'll see. Of course, we get identity information, we get intent. And what I mean here by intent is what a person intends towards us. Really, it's going to have to do with their emotion, and that's going to have to do with their expression, right? So when I say, we're able to perceive a person's intent, we're able to see if they're angry at us or if they're happy to see us, or if they need information from us or something like that. We are able to perceive intent astonishingly quickly when we look at a face. What else? Fitness. And what I mean by fitness, it's kind of another way of saying, the reproductive potential. Typically we consider that attractiveness, youthfulness, or something like that, right? But it turns out that this is again something that we seem to be able to extract so quickly and so easily. And then finally, we'll be talking about in next class, the asynchronous class, we'll be discussing the fact that we can actually get language information from faces in the context of lip reading. So, we'll talk next class about the fact that we're not great lip readers unless we, needed to become great lip readers by being deaf, but we do get speech information from faces, even though we don't have much kind of explicit practice doing so. Okay. Maybe you've noticed that a little bit when we've, after we've spent a few years interacting with folks at restaurants, waiters, waitresses, where you can't see the lower half of their face. And because of the background noise in the restaurant when they come over to tell you the specials, it's harder now than it used to be because we can't see them articulate. And that's really what we're talking about. And we'll talk about a lot next class. But these things are listed here as a way to kind of convince you that the brain, the perceptual brain, can get all of this information from faces and can get it so quickly, so efficiently that there's probably nothing in our world that communicates that fast and that efficiently. And we'll see we are able to do this even without having conscious awareness of having seen a face, which is, I think, some of the coolest research in this domain. Okay, let's talk about, though, first how sensitive we are to faces. In talking about like very small, very small differences in a face. So if you look at these faces, I have trouble distinguishing these faces a little bit, but if you grew up with these faces, this is Mao, if you grew up with these faces in mainland China and had seen a lot of images of Mao over and over again, it would be amazing how well you would be able to distinguish these images and say which one truly was the right photograph and which one had been manipulated. So just with a tiny bit of experience of recognizing somebody, that ability to recognize them kind of allows your brain to fine-tune all the different features of the face and all the different kind of configuration of those features, so you can tell when the face isn't quite right. So yeah, you become hypersensitive to specific faces, but we're also hypersensitive to faces in general in this way. We see faces everywhere, right? And there's tons of websites dedicated to this where, people post images of faces in, say, grilled cheese sandwiches or look for some of the houses, all these, what is this? This is the roof. This is a purse, this is a tree, and I imagine there's over 100 websites dedicated to showing faces in things that aren't faces. It is so easy for our brain to see that, right? In fact, it's almost impossible for our brain not to see this as a face, I think, right? And the same here. I'm having a little trouble. Oh, there it is. Okay, when I get closer to the purse, I see kind of Jabba the Hutt, Jabba the purse. There you go. And the same thing when people see faces sometimes of divine characters, from the Bible or something like that, in a grilled cheese sandwich or something on the side of a mountain, and also in the front of cars. And this is something actually the car designers know, which I think is really interesting. They know that the front of a car is processed in some ways like a face by the brain, by the perceptual brain. And in knowing that, what they will do is carefully design the front of a car so its, quote, face looks like a character, looks like a character that has a personality they want to convey. So if you look at the front of a kind of fun car like this, what is this, a Miata, right? Kind of has kind of a cheerful, kind of happy, fun sort of look to it. If you look in the front of certain, what do they call, muscle cars, like Camaros and things like that, they're a little bit more intimidating. They're a little bit more imposing, those car front faces. And this is something car designers know. They know that this is, that the brain's going to look for faces wherever it can. And why not take advantage of that and make car fronts look like faces that have specific personalities that convey what they want to convey about the car, okay? So yeah, it's almost as if whenever we look at something, our brain looks to see if it's a face at first. And if it's not, most things we see in a room aren't faces. We kind of continue to process it. But even if it's close to a face, we will see faces in it, right? So kind of the default, the thing the brain's most eager to find, in a way, are faces. It's cool. Which means that your ability to recognize faces or to integrate facial information happens astonishingly quickly. There are many experiments. We'll be talking about a few of them today, but many experiments where faces are shown so quickly to subjects in an experiment that they don't consciously recognize seeing a face. They don't consciously know they've seen a face. And so we're talking about 1/50th of a second. I mean, that's really, really fast. So imagine you're sitting at a computer terminal and you might see a flash, on the screen, and it might almost look like there's a, like a a little blip in the computer image, or maybe there's a loose connection. You know how TVs or computer monitors, if there's a loose connection, will kind of show a flash. So imagine maybe you experience that, maybe you don't experience anything. What you don't consciously experience is seeing a face. But still, we know that even with that type of very, very rapid presentation, the brain can process face information. Let me give you just one example of this. People sat in front of a computer terminal and were asked to push they were told they were going to see faces in this case. I mean, this must be a really tricky experiment to run, because subjects are told they're going to see faces shown really, really quickly. But then when they start seeing the faces, they don't have any conscious awareness of seeing a face. They say, I see a flash on the screen, but not even every time. And I certainly am not seeing faces. And well, just trust us, you are seeing faces, and we know they're being presented quickly. But let's see if you can do this. Press a button on the left if it's a famous face. Press a button on the right if it's a non-famous face, a stranger's face. Famous face left, non-famous right. All right, but I'm not seeing faces. Just do your best. Just guess randomly if you want. Okay, so this is what the task is. And then here's what they're shown. This is interesting. They're shown faces of famous people. And here you see Mick Jagger and Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, you probably know his name and maybe you know his face, but certainly when they ran the experiment, people knew his face. He was in the news. Dictator. Certainly, not well liked around the world. So we'll call that an infamous face, right? So when subjects are shown these, again, they have no conscious awareness and they think they're completely guessing, but they end up pressing famous if they see a face that is a famous person and is more positively regarded, more well regarded, is famous for something positive. Like Mick Jagger is a famous rock star musician, and people are favorable towards him in general. So when they see his face, even though they don't consciously recognize Mick Jagger, they'll push famous. When they see Saddam Hussein's face, maybe Mussolini or Hitler's face or something like that, they'll push not famous, even though those folks have famous faces. So what it suggests is two things. First of all, it suggests that even with these subliminal, below threshold presentations, the brain is making a distinction between famous and infamous, famous or not famous, right? However, it's not being perfect. What it's doing is it's not only recognizing the face unconsciously, right? It's also applying a value judgment to that face, which is kind of a deeper level of analysis, right? It's not just saying that's Mick Jagger's face and I like Mick Jagger. It's not just saying that's Mick Jagger's face, that's Saddam Hussein's face. It's saying that's Mick Jagger's face, I like Mick Jagger, I'm going to say he's famous. That's Saddam Hussein's face, I don't like him, I'm going to say he's not famous. So it's doing more than just kind of a superficial analysis of famous or infamous, or famous or not famous. It's actually making a judgment of the personality at the same time. All that happens unconsciously, subliminal presentations below the level of our awareness. It also happens with this. You've probably heard of the idea of prosopagnosia. Maybe you've heard the term. Prosopagnosia is a problem where typically somebody has had some sort of brain lesion, some sort of brain disruption. It's in generally a specific place in the brain where after they have a stroke, they wake up and they're pretty much okay. Their language is okay. Their coordinative skills are okay, but they have problems recognizing faces. So maybe you've heard this. I heard the other day that Brad Pitt thinks that he has developmental prosopagnosia, and that's also another type of prosopagnosia where people are born with less of an ability to recognize faces than the average person. That's what he says he has. But the way we used to understand this was through people who've had some type of brain damage. And there are people who, in fact, have a kind of very dramatic type, it would seem, where, after they've had the damage, they are shown pictures of people, on a screen one at a time, and they're asked whether or not these are people that they recognize. And sometimes they'd be pictures of famous people like Mick Jagger. Sometimes they'd be pictures of family members. And prosopagnosic would say, I have no idea. I can describe the picture. I maybe can describe something about the person's gender and age, but I don't recognize the person. Then they'd be shown a picture of themselves, the actual, a picture of the patient themselves. And they say, I'm really sorry. I don't recognize that person. I really, really don't. Okay. And this has been something that's kind of been reported for a very long time. Until about 15 years ago, or say, they started to test prosopagnosia in another way. What they would do is use kind of more sneaky measures of recognition than just asking somebody if they recognize the face. So they might put like little moisture sensors on the fingers. We've talked about, I think, ways of measuring skin sweat. And then they showed them pictures, and they would again ask them, do you recognize this person? No, I'm sorry, I'm trying, I can't. I think it's a young woman, but I can't recognize them. But in measuring their skin sweat, it turns out they would sweat more if in fact it was a familiar face, which is interesting. It's as if their skin can recognize the picture, but their conscious response, their conscious awareness, is not able to do that. So prosopagnosics, who we all long have thought had damage in their face recognition areas, seem to be doing some recognition at kind of a subliminal level. You ask them and they'll say, I don't recognize it, but they start sweating more if they see a family member. They start sweating more if they see Mick Jagger and they know who Mick Jagger is. They start sweating more if they see a picture of themselves. Okay, if they see a stranger, somebody they don't know, they sweat less. And you don't even need to do it like that. I mean, after that was discovered, it was like, oh my gosh, let's see if we can do it another way that wouldn't involve, all that fancy equipment and measuring sweat. And so what they did is they asked people to look at a face, but underneath the face, they'd put a name. Okay, this is a naming type of task, like Julia Roberts. So a picture would come up along with the name, and people would be asked to read the name as quickly as they could. They say, we know you can't recognize the face, but read the name as quickly as you can. And, people would remember that, there was a famous actress named Julia Roberts. So yeah, they say, oh, Julia Roberts, right. So here's the manipulation though. They would sometimes present the correct name with the face, and sometimes, oh shoot, I don't have this. Sometimes present the incorrect name with the face. So sometimes, a subject might see Julia Roberts' face with Julia Roberts' name and have to say Julia Roberts because they're reading. That's a naming task, they're just reading. Sometimes they'd see Sandra Bullock's face and Julia Roberts' name. And again, their job would be to say Julia Roberts because that's all they're doing is reading. And throughout, they say, do you recognize the face? Do you know if that is Julia Roberts or whatever? They said, no, I have no idea. I'm really sorry. I see it's a woman's face, but I don't know who that is. But subjects with prosopagnosia would be able to read the name faster, read Julia Roberts faster, if in fact her face was presented along with the name. If, on the other hand, it was Sandra Bullock's face along with Julia Roberts' name, they wouldn't be able to read it as fast. It's kind of a easier measure than skin sweat, but it suggests the exact same thing, that on some unconscious level, prosopagnosics, who we thought had a broken face area, are able to recognize faces. And it just seems that they're not able to consciously be aware that they're recognizing a face. So a lot of what goes on with face recognition happens at this kind of subliminal level. not just for prosopagnostics, for all of us, right? And we'll see a number of experiments that are gonna show that sort of thing. Okay, let's talk about one of the major ways that we use facial information. And that first way is going to be expression. Now, whenever I look at this slide, I look at these faces that are supposedly expressing things, and I think we can certainly interpret what those expressions are. Happiness, surprise maybe, disgust, I don't know what that fourth one on top is, cynicism or something like that, sadness, fear, anger, right? And the reason I laugh is because these are photos of people who've been asked to express an emotion for the purposes of taking a picture. Because it really is the case if you watch your friends as they express, or watch characters on a TV show or something like that as they express, right? These are pretty exaggerated, right? So how often somebody who's really surprised, your friends are surprised they look like this, right? How often when people are really angry do they look like this, right? Our expressions are more subtle than that. So these stimuli are old. These aren't the sort of stimuli that are used anymore these days. More natural expressions are used. But you may have heard of some of this research before. So there was this idea that if you showed these faces to people around the world, that they would show some universality. Okay, so for example, the classic kind of remote culture is a kind of a remote village in Papua New Guinea, and you show them a picture of a smiling face like this, and they would interpret that as a smile, just like you and I would, right? And there does seem to be some truth to that. There is some cultural universality when you show things like that. However, and I think this is interesting. When you start showing more natural images of people expressing things, not these exaggerated ones you're looking at now, you start to see less complete universality. What I mean by that is, I don't have pictures of natural facial expressions here, but you'll get the idea. That some of these might be mixed up, where one culture might think about this as anger, another might think of this as disgust. And we'll talk about why in just a second. But even on top of that kind of difference in cultures, there's differences in how extreme people will express things. Now, I think these are especially exaggerated, right? But maybe you've been, I don't know, maybe you've noticed this, maybe in traveling or there's such rich cultures in Southern California. Maybe you've, gone to, Chinatown in downtown Los Angeles, or I'm trying to just think of all the different cultures. There's a Persian Square, which is my wife's Persian, so we go down there and have dinner a lot. That's on Westwood, the Westwood Boulevard here in Los Angeles. You're exposed to different cultures, and a lot of these people came from the countries they first right off the boat, and you may have noticed this, that different cultures have different ways of expressing kind of facial emotion. The example I like to give is when I traveled in London many years ago. I took a sabbatical in London. My wife came to visit me before she was my wife. And we traveled around London for a while. And I remember being on the tube, the subway, and just being a friendly guy, kind of goofy, friendly, upstate New York dude like me. I would just smile at people, and people would be polite. They kind of, they'd nod, very kind of soft smile. Yeah, they'd be polite. But then we would go into rural England, to farm country, or then we moved on to Ireland, rural Ireland, beautiful places. And you'd be on a bus, or you go to a restaurant or something like that and smile, same goofy, Rosenblum smile, and people would be like, like that. They'd have these wide expressions, right? They would just be very, very much less reserved than the people in London. And this is a really well-known fact, that people have what's called different display rules depending on the culture. And it's not even major cultural differences that will show this. I mean, we're talking about, folks in Great Britain that either live in a city or live in a rural area. How kind of extreme, how kind of large the expressions are will depend on whether they live in a city or in a rural area. It's known to exist, especially like that. People in rural areas tend to have more exaggerated expressions than people in cities for whatever reason. I'm going to leave this out. The strength of the emotion, I'm not going to talk about that, but it is so it's really the strength of the expression. Don't worry about the emotion thing. It's kind of another line of research that's not worth going into right now because there's some question about it. I should probably take that off. Okay. Anyway, still, when it comes to showing more natural expressions to people, in London or, more rural areas of England, Papua New Guinea, what you do find is still there is some cultural universality, but it is less kind of specific. Generally, what the categories that are consistent are positive and negative. So yeah, a smile is pretty much a smile all over the world, more or less depending on the how extreme it is, right? People will probably see this smile, and from pretty much everywhere in the world will say that is expressing some type of happiness, or glad to see you, or something like that, right? But what is what is sometimes confused here are expressions that say are more negative, where, as I said before, this might be considered anger in one culture, and this might be considered anger in another culture, and this might be disgust, or this might be anger, or something like that, or this is disgust. I'm sorry. Yeah. This might be anger some places, right? So happiness is generally seen as happiness, and negative emotions are generally seen negative. But typically, in the negative emotions, things are mixed up a little bit across cultures. Okay, so I wanted to say that. However, nobody doubts how important facial expressions are, right? As I said, this is giving us something about the kind of mental state, the intent the person we're interacting with has towards us. Are they happy to see us? Okay. Are they kind of grossed out by us? Are they angry because of something that happened in the past? Okay, maybe they find us scary, right? So that's a way of thinking of facial expression, right? What does the person intend? And it's important as, kind of social animals, we are social animals. And for that reason, it is critically important that we be able to tell somebody's mental state towards us very quickly. So you wouldn't be surprised to know that these are things that, like identity, are subliminally perceived. So here's the experiments now. Here's how this would work. Imagine you are in front of a computer monitor, and you actually, in this experiment, you're not going to be told that there's faces. Instead, you're just going to be told in this first version of the experiment that you're going to be seeing, say, Chinese characters or something like, Asian handwritten characters, and your job is just to say on a scale from 1 to 10, how aesthetically pleasing, how pretty do you think this one is, how nice do you think this one looks, right? So they just need something to kind of allow people to make judgments of kind of the attractiveness of a character or something like that. Okay, that's all you'll be doing, just being shown these characters. And every once in a while, you might see a flash on the screen. Just ignore the flashes. As these characters come up one at a time, tell us whether you like it or not. Now, you've been already kind of been given the secret of this. What's going to happen before they see each character is they are going to be presented a face, but it's going to be presented at way too fast a rate for the subject to consciously be aware of it. So they're sitting in front of the computer monitor, they see a flash, okay, too quick to recognize it's a face. Maybe they see a flash, often they don't. And then here's the Chinese character. Do you like this one? Sure. Cool. Now you can imagine what these faces are like. Let's just use these for now. Sometimes the face that is being presented will have a nice smile on it. Sometimes it will have either a disgusted look, and as you'll see, there'll be another experiment where it might be an angry look. Now, it will not be the same image over and over again. It will actually be different people smiling or different people being disgusted. But it doesn't matter to your conscious brain, because all your conscious brain is doing is evaluating those characters. But what you find, there's some characters, there's a character right now, that if you are presented a smiling face before you are shown that character, you will like the character better than if you are shown a disgusted face before you see that character. Okay. Again, you have no awareness of seeing the expression. You have no awareness of seeing the face, but your brain is processing that facial information unconsciously and so quickly that it then can have an influence on how much you like the beauty of that Chinese character, which is cool. Okay. What else? It says they're hypothetical decisions. And this is another experiment in the similar way that the previous experiment presented subliminal faces. This second experiment will do the same thing. Okay, but the task will be different. So you'll be in another experiment now, and you'll be told that you're going to see an image and told a hypothetical situation, and your job is to say how you would handle this hypothetical situation. And so I have this image here of being on a dark street. So you'd be told, okay, you're going to see a picture of a dark street for a second. And what we want you to do when you see that picture is imagine yourself walking on that street at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're coming home from a party and nobody else is around. You're walking on that street. Then all of a sudden you see somebody coming the other direction towards you on that side of the street. And you see it's a kind of big looking person, imposing looking person. Do you go to the other side of the street? Okay. Do you decide that you want to avoid them, or do you keep walking on that side of the street? Okay, so you'll see that in just a second. And then right before that picture comes up, guess what? You're being presented either a happy smiling face or an angry face, again at an unconscious, a subliminal speed. You don't see a face, you don't recognize a face, you don't recognize an expression. Maybe you see a flash on the screen, but it is presented to you. And okay, you know where this is going. Depending on if you see the smiling face or the frowning, angry face, it will influence the likelihood that you'll say, oh, I'm okay, I'll stay on this side of the street as the person comes towards me. Or if you see the angry face, you're more likely to say, I think just to play it safe, it's late, why not be safe? Better safe than sorry. I will cross the street. Again, without any awareness of seeing the face. So this is just very clear that your brain is processing unconsciously faces and the meaning of that face when it comes to facial expression and what somebody might intend towards us. And then finally, and I'm a little hesitant to talk about this because I'll tell you why in a second. Say that you're going to be told to do a mood questionnaire in just a second, but first you're going to sit in front of a computer and count the number of flashes on a screen or something like that. So the idea is to kind of get people to look at the screen, but again, faces are going to be shown at too fast a rate for people to be aware that they're seeing a face. Okay, look at the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flashes. Okay, what is your mood? How good is your mood on a scale from 1 to 10? Is it good, 10, poor, 1? Okay. The faces that you were actually presented would either be the smiling face again, or in this case, the sad face. Right. The question is, being presented those at a subliminal, unconscious level, would it have an effect on your mood? And the answer is yes, a tiny, tiny little effect. That's why I wanted to be a little careful when I said this, because you can go online and find, hopefully it's not expensive, but little apps that will show you happy faces over and over again, and that's supposedly going to lift your mood. Okay. First of all, it seems to help if they're subliminal, but even then, in this case, the mood change is just a tiny bit. So, what's your mood right now? Well, I wish I didn't have to be in this class, but it's almost over. So I'll say it's a 4 or 5, right? Maybe that's your mood now. If you were seeing a happy face presented subliminally right before I asked you that, maybe it would push it to a 5 or 6. If you were seeing a sad face, maybe 4 or 5. And it's not going to work for everybody. And it's very fleeting, meaning that that influence is just going to hold for maybe a minute or so. Because then if you're asked a few minutes later, after not having been presented any faces, it's going to revert to where it normally would be. So yeah, seeing a smiling face presented subliminally might elevate your mood just a tiny bit. The fact that it works at all is interesting scientifically and interesting in our understanding of the brain, but I wouldn't spend money having subliminal happy faces presented to you, because it's not going to be a very big effect and it's going to be very fleeting. Okay. However, I think you'll find this really interesting as another example of the subliminal power of expression and how our brains can do this. And this has to do with something we're going to be talking about next class, and that's imitation. And we're going to talk about the fact that our brain has been designed to imitate each other in kind of subtle but very important ways, as you'll see. And I'm going to argue that nowhere is this more obvious than when it comes to imitation of faces. Because when we see an expressing face, our faces provide their own subtle imitation when that occurs. Okay? So here's the experiment now. You're in front of a computer monitor and you are being shown faces, and your job, these are now faces that you can actually consciously see. You see the faces and your job is to rate how old the person is or something like that. Yeah, so maybe let's go with that. So you see a face, it comes up, you say, well, how old do you think this person is? I don't know, look like they're in their 20s. Okay, how old is this person? Person seems older, 40s, right? That sort of thing you're going through. Okay. But not only these faces have a specific age, they actually have a subtle expression on too. But you're not asked to look at that. You're asked to ignore that and just judge the age. That's it. Okay. However, like as is occurring for me right now, there's a camera looking at the subject. Okay. They don't know that. Right? It's disguised. They're told that at the end, so don't worry, it's not all sneaky, but they don't know that. And as they are looking at faces with different facial expressions, the camera will show on the subject that they are subtly imitating the expression they're seeing. Okay? I'll show you how subtle it is. In fact, that's why I wanted to post these pictures. Here is somebody looking at a smiling face on the computer monitor, and here is somebody looking at this is before they actually were shown any faces. Okay, so you can see this is the neutral face, this is when they're looking at a happy face. Okay. And as you can see, there's very subtle changes. This person is not looking at anything on the computer, they're just kind of staring straight into the computer. And now this person is looking at a frowning face on the computer, not dramatic frowning, it's just, kind of a more serious face. And they're just asked to judge the age. But when they're doing this, their face kind of reflexively goes into that type of posture. Now, that's a case where people can where the scientists can actually see a difference. But for a lot of people, it's not even this dramatic. For a lot of people, they will do the imitation, but it won't be present. It won't be visible on the face. So what they'll do is they'll connect little sensors, external sensors. They just basically put little pieces of tape with wire around the muscles of the face, okay, around the skin of the face, over the muscles of the face. And they ask people to do the same test, and they say, we're going to be doing something later with your own face, but we're putting on these now. The first thing we're going to do is just have you judge age, okay? And maybe in this case, you won't see anything like this happen, but as a person is looking at a smiling face, they will engage their smile-related muscles unconsciously, of course, when they see that face. And the same thing when a person looks at a frowning face. Okay, these muscles will be active. So whether you're measuring, this kind of expression imitation by actually just taking a picture or a video of somebody looking at a happy face, or looking to see if there's muscle activity there in the muscles that are related to the happy face, you will see some type of imitation, which is cool. Okay. Now, not only does this work if people are told that they are going to see a face and are able to see the face, it also works unconsciously. And I think this is so cool. So this little imitation that our face does when we see an expressing face even occurs if the face we're seeing is presented to us unconsciously. If we can't consciously see that we're looking at a face, we don't consciously know we're looking at a face. So, again, we've been talking about how quickly faces are processed by the brain. And here's evidence that they are processed by the brain so quickly that we incorporate expression information into our evaluation of the face, even if we don't know we're looking at a face. And even if we don't know we're looking at a face, when we see that expression, we imitate it just a little bit. So it can be induced, this little imitation can be induced in the sorts of experiments we've been talking about, where people aren't presented faces that are consciously recognized but subliminally presented. So the same type of thing occurs. Finally, and this has become a tiny bit controversial, but I think the data are there, so I'm going to talk about it just very briefly. I'm going to talk about the fact that when you see a smiling face and you imitate that smiling face just a tiny bit, it seems to have a tiny influence over our emotion. Okay, so up here I said that seeing a subliminally perceived face, subliminally presented face, can have an effect on our mood. For that to occur, small as it is, there needs to be some type of imitation. That subtle imitation needs to occur. So if people are doing this experiment where they are looking at subliminal faces so quickly that they don't know they're seeing faces, and sometimes the faces are smiling, okay, 5 faces that are smiling, for example, and then their mood is reported, okay? If in fact they are allowed to do that natural imitation of the smile, their mood will be a tiny bit elevated. But if they're not allowed to do that, say there's lots of ways to do this, they can be asked to hold a pen in their teeth. Like that. Or a pen in their teeth like that. That's going to prevent my smile muscles from doing that imitation. Okay? And if that occurs, okay, that tiny bit of mood elevation will not. So what plays a role in the fact that seeing smiling faces just, unconsciously, and that it has a tiny effect in our mood, what seems to play a role in that is being able to have that imitative reflex of that expression. If it's prevented, lots of ways you can do that, but this is the easiest. I can't smile now when I look at smiley faces, right? If it's prevented, then my mood will have no elevation. There'll be no increased happiness. Oh, here comes the gardener, speaking of happiness. All right. Good. This is a good time to take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about personality from faces. But let's take a little break here and do our quiz question. Okay. Yeah, this one has to do with the uncanny valley. Let's make sure I have all these right. Yeah, uncanny valley. And we got our friend Tom Hanks in this one too. Which is most likely to look eerie? A photograph of the real Tom Hanks. Okay. B, a cartoon of Tom Hanks. C, a quasi-realistic computer animated video of Tom Hanks. And what that just means is kind of not quite realistic. Quasi-realistic means, kind of fake realistic. Computer animated video of Tom Hanks. Or D, a video of the real Tom Hanks. Okay. Which of those four are going to look most eerie? And I think you should have no problem with this. Oh, wow. Did you all, is that it? How many people are here? 9. Okay, so I'll give you a few more seconds if you want to answer them. You're doing very well. Okay, I think that should do it. Let me end the poll and share the results. Too easy. Yeah, that is in fact the uncanny valley. And we talked about Tom Hanks as being a great example about that. Although I find the kids a lot scarier than Tom Hanks for some reason in that movie, but Tom Hanks is pretty creepy too. Yeah, that's what the uncanny valley is about, right? When animators try to make it look kind of real and they don't do it well enough, they're not perfect at it, it will look eerie. A photograph of Tom Hanks isn't eerie. That's Tom Hanks. Everyone loves Tom Hanks. He's not scary. A cartoon of Tom Hanks would be like an exaggeration, kind of like a caricature of Tom Hanks. And we've learned from the Incredibles movie, that's exactly what they did. They didn't want the characters to look real in the Incredibles. They wanted to look stylized, and that doesn't make it look creepy. It makes them look wonderful. And then a video of Tom Hanks, of course, isn't going to look creepy. It's the uncanny valley that occurs when they try to computer animate Tom Hanks' face, and it just isn't quite good enough. Terrific. Take a picture if you haven't yet. And cool. All right. So let's continue talking about faces and expression. And now we're going to move a little bit over to a different aspect of this. Oh, shoot. I don't know if I did this last time, did I? No. Okay. Good. Everything's okay. We're going to talk about personality from faces. Now, I've got to be a tiny bit careful here as well, because I know you were told that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, right? You shouldn't judge people's personality from how they look. And it's true. You should always give people a chance. You shouldn't judge people from their appearance. We've all been wonderfully surprised, or maybe sometimes less wonderfully surprised by how somebody's personality appears based on how their face or their appearance seems to present itself, right? I've met people that look kind of grumpy all the time, who are some of the warmest, most lovely people I met that just kind of look grumpy. And I've met people who are cheery all the time, they're smiling all the time, kind of seem very perky, who are less nice, right? So we all know that there are certainly deviations from the idea that we can get information about a person's personality from looking at their face. But guess what? It's something that we really can't help doing, right? So when you are shown pictures of faces and are asked to judge something about a personality, you can do so. I mean, your brain kind of jumps to something quickly, about even sooner than the count of 1 second, 1/10 of a second. Our impressions of somebody's personality from looking at their face occurs. And then it kind of stays like that unless we talk with them. So, you look at these two faces, and if I asked you which of these two faces on here is of the more pleasant person, the person on the left or the person on the right, which one maybe had an easier life, which one had a harder life, your brain can't help but make judgments of that, even though it's probably incorrect to do that. You might be very wrong. But if you were then shown these faces and next week, your impressions would be pretty much the same. So your impressions are formed quickly and they are maintained even after some time. This is, of course, not getting a chance to know them. However, sometimes we're right, and we can be more right than you would really expect. Okay, so yes, we all have these wonderful examples, or kind of disappointing examples where somebody's appearance doesn't really predict the sort of person they are, especially in the face. But we're better than might be expected, or we might be, I guess, informed when our parents tell us, or churches tell us not to judge people before we talk to them. Okay, we tend to be better than I think most people would believe we are. Okay, why might that be the case? Okay, so let's look at these two faces. All right, let's look at these two faces. And if I asked you which one had the harder life, or seemed to be a little more sullen, a little more serious, I think maybe I would say the person on the right of the slide, the top right of the slide. This person looks like, they maybe have had a little bit of a tougher go of things than the person on the left here. Okay, that's my impression. I don't know if that was your impression, but all right. If I'm correct, why might that be the case? Why might that be the case? Well, you could imagine, say a child is born with maybe a more serious looking face for some reason, right? For whatever reason, something to do with their facial muscles, the kind of shape of their face or whatever. When they were born, they were kind of looked serious. People are going to probably interact with them in a less humorous way, maybe, or maybe a more serious way. And versus a child who seems to have the type of face that's maybe just has big cheeks or something like that, and seems like they're just kind of maybe a lighter, kind of happier kid or whatever. And I'm talking about not even having them smile or something, but some kids just look like kind of like happy kids when they're not even smiling. People are going to interact with that child differently, and those interactions are going to help form the child's and then the adolescent, teenager, adult's personality, right? So in a way, our personalities might grow into the type of faces we were born with. Right? Our personalities might grow into the type of faces we were born with. And that idea that our personalities get shaped by how people interact with us based on our faces, we can call a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, did I take this out? I did. Oh my gosh. Okay. Hold on just a second. Let me see something here. Yes. Okay. I just reorganized it. Okay. Let me step back. I'm going to talk about that in a second, this idea that I'm being interacted with from childhood that could have an influence over my personality. But let's talk about this experiment first with these elderly faces. So the elderly faces that you're seeing here, these are people probably in their late 60s, 70s, or something like that. All these pictures were taken of these older people, and they were asked to pose neutral and different expressions: happiness, sadness, that sort of thing, maybe anger, that sort of thing. And then these same women, I think they were mostly women in these pictures, were asked to fill out personality questionnaires. And maybe you've learned about these sorts of questionnaires in other classes, but there's some very kind of simple ways you can get information about a personality. Maybe their enthusiasm, how enthusiastic a person are they, how nervous a person are they sad often, are they worried a lot, are they happy a lot, are they more likely to be carefree when it comes to events that are occurring in their life. So these are kind of simple personality characteristics that can be kind of determined by questionnaires. So those were done on the women too. Okay, and then these photos were shown to, say, undergraduates, and let's just say that these are all neutral expressions. And basically, these undergraduates were just asked to do what you and I did, which is to evaluate the personality. Which of these two faces are happier? Which of these two faces are of a more conscientious person? Which of these two faces are of a more neurotic person, or something like that? And what they found, what the researchers found, is that these judgments of the personalities from the face photos were actually okay. People were not terrible about this, even when seeing the faces in these neutral expressions you're seeing right now. That people would say that maybe this person worries more than this person. And they would be not too bad at it. Okay? They'd be correct at better than chance levels. Why would that be the case? And here, so what I'm saying is there's some accuracy in doing this, especially with elderly faces, which I think is an important piece of this puzzle. Especially with elderly faces, it seems that we can make judgments about personality and be fairly accurate, even when the face is seen in a neutral expression. Why might that be the case? Well, one possibility is what I mentioned before, and that is if a person is born with a type of face that looks like they worry, a child can look like a worrying person, right? They might be interacted with by adults and other children, assuming that they have a worrying personality. Now, they might not. Okay, when they're born, they might not actually have that type of personality, but because they have the face of a worrier or the face of a carefree person, there's kind of an assumption about everybody's interactions with that, plays a role in everybody's interactions with them. So if I'm interacting with a child who has a worried kind of resting face versus a more carefree resting face, I'm going to interact with the person kind of assuming they're worried about something, and that over time will shape their personality. On the other hand, if I'm interacting with the child that seems to have a more carefree face, I might interact with them assuming they have a carefree personality, and that is also going to shape their personality. So that's what I mean of the self-fulfilling prophecy, where we grow into the faces that we're born with. Our personalities grow into the faces that we're born with. Okay? That might be why we are able to look at an elderly face especially and be not too terrible at judging personality based on that. Okay? That might be one reason. But there might be another reason, and I think you'll find this interesting. What we need to remember about a face, which you may not have thought about before, but faces, the shape of faces, are dependent to some degree on how they exercise, how faces exercise. Well, what does that mean? Faces exercise. Well, like we exercise our biceps and we exercise our triceps and all the muscles in our body, to kind of make ourselves look fit and of course be healthy, right? But we want to look fit too, right? We know that exercise, lifting weight, going through the same motions again and again will change the shape of our body. That also happens with faces. Don't forget that faces are made up of all these muscles underneath the skin. And the more we go through specific motions with our faces, the more that's going to change the shape of our faces. If in fact we do a lot of smiling Okay, that's going to have a change. That's going to have an influence on the structure of our face. Versus if we do a lot of frowning, that's going to have another type of influence over the structure of our face. Right? It's like, say you decide that you want your biceps to be big, and I guess bodybuilders really do this. They want to, kind of balance out the way their bicep looks and their tricep looks. Say, my bicep's not big enough, so I'm going to spend a lot of time doing this type of exercise where I'm lifting weights like this versus, okay, now I overdid it here, and now my triceps look kind of puny, muscle down here. So now I've got to do one of those tricep exercises, and the dips are really good for those. Those things that you hold on to the little bar and you dip your body. Now my tricep's going to be good. Okay. So, and that's going to have, those are going to be exercises that are influencing the structure of your arm and the appearance of your arm. The same thing happens with faces. The more you smile, the more certain muscles are going to be exercised, and that's going to have an influence over the structure of your face and how your face appears. The more you frown, okay, that's going to have an influence on the exercise of other muscles of the face. That's going to change the structure of how the face appears. Okay? These are called expressive habits. Basically, it's just what habit is our face in when we, and when we are making emotions. So now you can understand how this might be related to personality, right? If this is not now the self-fulfilling prophecy, this is the other kind of influence. If you've had a life where you've laughed a lot, you've smiled a lot, that's going to influence how your face looks so that people can look at your face and infer something about your personality. Same thing if you've had a tough life, people sometimes have tough around the world. Of course, they can go through wars and things like that. And you've probably seen pictures of people after, some type of war or something like that. It changes how they look, right? And that at least partly is due to, probably not the smile muscles being exercised very much at all, right? But those kind of life experiences that are influenced by one's personality can change the structure of a face, just like exercise in the arms can change the shape and the visible structure of an arm. So we are exercising our faces all the time, and those exercises are influencing how our faces look to people. The exercise that we do is dependent on our personalities to some degree, so our personalities are reflected in our faces, even in our neutral faces, based on how they've been structured from the exercise of expressions. Okay, cool. With elderly faces, I think this isn't too surprising. Maybe you've maybe heard the idea that a person's life is written on their face, right? And certainly with wrinkles and things like that, that can be true too. You see people have a lot of laugh lines here, then you assume they've laughed a lot, or they have a lot of lines here. Maybe they've done more frowning, that sort of thing. But this isn't just true of elderly faces. It can be true of younger faces, and younger faces that are in fact kind of homogenized. And what I mean by homogenized is that you can look at these women's faces here on the slide and see that they're not only different in their kind of facial shape, right, and maybe their wrinkles and things like that, but their hair is different. The kind of way they're holding their head is a little bit different, and that might give a clue too about their personalities. What if we get rid of that and get rid of the hair, get rid of the differences in hair, and get rid of the differences in the way the head's positioned, and use younger faces, so we're not talking wrinkles? Can people still make judgments like that? And I've got a demonstration to show you that, yeah, they can. Here we go. You can just maybe make a note of this yourself. You'll be the subjects in this experiment. And I'm going to show you two faces side by side, and I'm going to ask you questions about those two faces. For example, which of these two faces seems to be the more agreeable person? Now, I know you're looking at these and say, oh my gosh, they're very, very close. But if I asked you, which would be the one that would be more likely to agree about, say you were working on a project with them and they would be more likely to be willing to compromise and agree with you and that sort of thing? Would it be the person on the left or the person on the right? Okay. Here's another one like this. Who would be the more conscientious person? The person on the left or the person on the right? Who's more conscientious? You'll see here that these are very homogenized, right? What I mean by that is, kind of the hair is exactly the same. The position of the face is exactly the same. It's not like those elderly faces you saw before. And we're getting rid of all that kind of extraneous information and really trying to zero in on what's available in the face. The person on the left or the person on the right more conscientious? Who's more extroverted? Person on the left or the person on the right? Who's more likely to, maybe come up to you at a party and say hi, or, kind of engage you in conversation, the person on the left or the person on the right? Okay, who's more neurotic? The person on the left or the person on the right? Make little notes on this, you don't have to, you get the idea. Who's more adventurous? The person on the left or the person on the right? Adventurous meaning who's more likely to try new things, try new foods, maybe, go on a trip that they've never been on before, the person on the left or the person on the right. And there's one more, and it's a little odd, but I'll talk about it in a second. Which of these two people is more likely to be open to casual sex? Which of these two people is more likely to be open to casual sex? The person on the left or the person on the right? Now, these are younger faces, certainly, and what we're doing here, when I asked you those questions, especially the first 5, is I asked you questions about their personality based on a personality kind of questionnaire that breaks a person's personality into 5 different characteristics. There's lots of ways of doing this. If you've ever taken a personality psychology class, there's volumes and volumes of books on how you can possibly do this. There's research that suggests some ways are better than others. But this idea that you can break a person's personality down into 5 main things and establish where they lie on those 5 dimensions is something that is, kind of used a lot. And so anyone's personality, they would say, can be broken down into how agreeable they are, how conscientious they are, how extroverted or introverted they are, how neurotic they are, and how open they are to new experiences. All right, these faces are homogenized, really, right? It's very clear that they are, all the kind of face or person-specific information about the hair and all that stuff is taken out. They are tried to make, the experimenters are trying to really zero in on the face. These faces are also created in a very interesting way. What you are looking at there, when you looked at each pair of faces, is not just 2 faces, believe it or not, in each of those sets. In each set, you saw, I guess you could say, it's a combination of faces that made each of those images kind of superimposed on each other. Here's how it did, how it worked. Let's go with neuroticism. Okay, so the experimenters brought in 100 women for the female images here. And they took pictures and they made sure that the 100 women were sitting in exactly the same place and exactly the same dimensions of how they related to the frame of the picture, and they made the hair kind of consistent across and all that sort of thing. So the pictures could be kind of superimposed on each other. So they could match the eyes up. So the pictures could be superimposed on each other, right? And then what they did is, after they took pictures of those 100 women, each time a woman came in, they also had them fill out this personality questionnaire, which allowed them to determine how neurotic each of the women were, how extroverted each of the women were, all that sort of thing. Okay. And here's now what they did. Say, again, let's go to neuroticism. They took the women that had personality questionnaire responses that showed them to be the 10 most neurotic of the 100, and then looked at the questionnaire to find the 10 least neurotic of the 100 women. And so neuroticism, can be evaluated with many, many questions. How nervous do you get before a test? Do you get nervous when you're flying? I don't know, a whole bunch of questions like this. Anyway, so now we have the 10 out of the 100, we have the 10 most and 10 least neurotic women. And then they take the images of, say, the 10 most neurotic women and superimpose them on each other to make kind of one highly neurotic, average-looking face. And they do the same thing with the least neurotic looking faces, right? They take the 10 women that responded to the questionnaire to be shown to be the least neurotic and superimpose the images of their faces on each other. So now they have a kind of an averaged image of the least neurotic face. And these two images are now the ones they present to subjects. So, these are really, really, these are not even individual people. These are, I guess, in principle, the kind of average face that represents a neurotic and non-neurotic person. Can people tell the difference? And they can. At least for most of these images, they could be determined that, I think it's typically, what is that? The one on the right is the one that is the more neurotic than the one on the left, I think in this case, right? I don't know if that's what you saw. Now, subjects aren't perfect at this. I don't know if you were, always said right versus left, right, or whatever. It doesn't make a difference. People are not perfect. And people are better with female faces done this way than male faces done this way for probably some interesting reasons. So they aren't very good at judging personality from these averaged male faces, but both male and female subjects are good at determining the personality characteristics from these averaged female faces. Okay, they could do it for most of those characteristics. I think maybe all of them, or maybe they were not good with openness to experience, or one of these things they weren't as good at. It's probably in the book. But the fact they could do it at all is really, really interesting. Oh, and then this last one, openness to casual sex, they could do as well. This was another experiment. And again, done the exact same way, where they superimpose the faces. And I think in this case, the image on the left is the one that is from women who were more likely to say they were open to casual, romantic experiences than, and the women on the picture on the right represented the average of the 10 images of the faces of women who said that they would be less open to casual sex. And that's something that both male and female perceivers could determine, which is interesting. So it's not just kind of little wrinkles and stuff like that you get in elderly faces that seem to convey aspects of personality. Even when you use younger faces, even when you use faces that are kind of created based on averages, right? These aren't even kind of really real faces of a single person. These are faces that are representing 10 people that have a specific type of personality characteristic. Okay. Subjects can do this. They're not perfect, certainly. They are not. I'm sure you weren't perfect. I'm not perfect when I perform this task and look to try to judge which is which, right? But overall, we're better than chance at doing it, which is interesting. Okay. One more thing I wanted to mention about this that I think you'll find interesting, and that has to do with this idea of spouses looking like each other. So there's a number of websites that show these sort of images of husband and wife that look like each other. And there's a husband and wife that I got that from, I don't know which website it was, but there's an image of a husband and wife that at least ostensibly look like each other, right? And maybe you think that your parents look like each other, or couples that look like each other, kind of. And there's a lot of things that can go into that, right? When these experiments were initially conducted, it was like 10, 20 years ago, it was still the case that people very often chose mates within their own ethnic groups or racial groups or something like that. So yeah, there'd be a chance that you would look like your spouse in the beginning, because if you grew up in a certain culture, with a certain, dark appearance or lighter appearance, dark hair, light hair, whatever, that would have an influence on who you'd end up marrying. That's because that's the culture that you spend most of your time in. Of course, now, in Southern California, it's wonderfully diverse, and things are less determined by that. But it still could be that there's some degree to which we choose mates that look more like us. What I'm interested in here, though, is something a little different. And that has to do with, over time, do we end up looking more like our spouses? So you can, and these experiments usually involve, taking pictures of people at their wedding day, taking those images, and then taking pictures of the people when they're in their 60s and 70s. Have these people grown to look more like each other over time? And in many cases, yeah, people do. Husbands and wives do. However, the degree to which they do has to do with the relationship and the nature of the relationship. What the research has found is that if the relationship between the partners is one of emotional support, if they support each other, if they're empathetic to each other, if they basically support each other emotionally, then they tend to end up being more similar in appearance over time. Okay. Well, maybe that's not that surprising, right? If they're not getting along over the years, they stayed together for the children or whatever, and they just, they're not really sharing their emotional lives with each other, and maybe they're not going to look very much like each other. But the fact that when they do share their emotional lives, they are kind of emotionally supportive, they're empathetic with each other, means that they are going to look more like each other, might have implications for what we discussed before with regard to expressive habits, right? So if the members of the couple are sharing their emotions and doing a lot of laughing together, or if they've had a tough time, or one of them's had a tough time and the other one's been very empathetic with that tough time, they're doing more frowning together just because of the mutual empathy that goes on, right? Then their faces, in a way, get exercised in the same way, right? They do a lot of laughing together. When things are good, they get exercised, with the smiles. They do, support. When one's sad, the other one will be supportive and be more sad because they're empathizing. That's going to change things in a way too. So this convergence of faces over time with spouses might again be related to expressive habits. Our faces are muscles. They get exercised in different ways. That exercise changes the visible appearance of our faces. So that is related to our personality and the sorts of expressions our personalities affect. Okay. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I'm going to show you this image right before we take our break, and then I'll give you the answer. Okay. Now, I know I look a lot like my dog. I don't know. Do we look like our dogs? Do we grow to look like our dogs? Do our dogs grow to look like us? I really wanted to find something to talk about that I could put in the book. I thought that'd be really fun. But at least when I wrote the book, there was no real evidence that this occurred. Okay, I don't think it had really been tested very thoroughly. What there was evidence for is that if you go to a dog park and take pictures of owners and then take pictures of the dogs separately, okay, here's a picture of the owner, here's a picture of the dog, and then ask people to look at these pictures from the dog park and match the dogs to the owners, people can do it at better than chance levels. Yeah, maybe that a certain type of person, the way a certain type of person looks, you can predict the type of dog that they might have. Of course, my son and I took our dog to the vet last week, and boy, there was a lady there. Well, I mean, part of it part of it was she was dressed like her poodle. The poodle had a little kind of bejeweled necklace on, and the jewels on the poodle's collar matched perfectly the jewels on the woman's shoes. I think that was intentional. But boy, this woman kind of looked like a poodle. All right, I think it was intentional. Anyway, so you can make these matches based on owners and dogs. Not perfectly, of course, but at better than chance levels. But then when people are asked, okay, now make the matches just based on appearance, just based on which dog looks like which person. When people are asked to do that, they do not match owner and dog. Okay, you know, it's hard to do. I mean, these pictures are exaggerated. I mean, it's obvious, you know, that these individuals would go with these dogs, no question. But typically, things aren't that dramatic. And at least when I wrote the book, there was no evidence that we grow to look more like our pets. Maybe that's changed. I probably should look it up, but I thought you might just be interested in that. Okay, good. Let's take our break, and we'll come back and we'll do a question right off the bat. All right, we are back. Let's do a polling question as promised. Okay, yeah, something we just talked about. Different cultures and facial expression. So the question is, different cultures, A, interpret the 7 core facial expressions in exactly the same way. B, have different display rules for facial expressions. C, all produce their facial expressions with the same degree of exaggeration. Or D, all of the above. Okay. So go ahead and take some time, maybe look back at your slide if you're unsure. You should be able to do it. All right, another 10 seconds or so. Okay. Looks like we had a little bit of a problem on this one, so we will take some time to go over it. The correct, oh, God, it keeps on jumping back. The correct answer is actually B, that different cultures have different display rules for facial expressions. Remember the kind of example I want you to keep is me maybe traveling in London and rural England and Ireland, where people's display rules for facial expressions were so different, right? A smile in London was kind of more constrained. A smile in rural England and in Ireland was generally much more exaggerated. So that's absolutely the case. Those are called different display rules across different cultures. So that answer is correct, B. What about A? Interpret the 7 core facial expressions in exactly the same way. Remember I said there was some cultural universality when they came to, positive and negative emotions, but those 7 emotions or expressions would get mixed together within negative and within positive, especially within negative. One culture might say a disgusted look is actually an angry look and vice versa. Okay, so A is not true. C, all produce their facial expressions with the same degree of exaggeration. And that's incorrect as well. As I said, the exaggeration of the facial expression is going to depend on the display rule. So it's not true of that they all have the same degree of exaggeration. So that both B and C are contradictory. And so B is the correct answer. A and C are incorrect. So the answer a lot of folks chose was all of the above can't be true because A and C are incorrect. So take a picture. It looks like some of you got a little confused on this. So take a picture and make sure you know the correct answer is B to this question. And you'll get that right on the exam. Cool. All right, let's go back to our slides here. Woof. There we go. All right, make myself big. See. Oh shoot, I didn't mean to do that, folks. Well, we can go there. Sorry. I'm just trying to make my image large. Hold on. There we go. Nice and big. Rosenblum. All right. So we're kind of, we've talked a lot about the kind of the face processing, being especially efficient, especially fast, and probably the class of stimuli which conveys the most information and as a result has the, kind of the, what was I going to say? That we seem to have this astonishing sensitivity to faces, which can then, of course, account for things like the uncanny valley and all those kind of unconscious face processing examples we talked about in the first half of class. So a question arises, do we have special processes that we reserve just for face perception? Do we have special processes that the brain uses just for faces? Okay. And this has been a question that's been going on a long, long time. It was actually starting in the 70s, people wondered that. I mean, it seems that there might be a special area for faces, maybe, in the brain. And maybe that area uses special processes that are reserved only for faces, not other things. So I'm just going to quickly talk to you a little bit about the history of that research by introducing you to this phenomenon I think you'll find interesting. Probably by now, when you've looked at this upside down face for a few seconds, a minute maybe now, you recognize who this is, this upside down face, okay? But look how much easier it is to recognize when it's an upright face, right? That's the same face now upright. And it's, when we look at upright faces, it's like the face jumps out at us. The information just kind of screams, this is who the person is, right? Where the inverted face, it takes a little while longer. Okay? This is a well-known effect that it's much easier to recognize faces when they are upright than when they are inverted. It's just called the facial inversion effect, right? So maybe that's not that surprising. Maybe they're, when we look at a picture of an airplane or a bicycle that's inverted, it might take a little bit longer for us to recognize what it is than when it's upright. But with faces, it seems to be a disproportionate difference. What I mean by that is that when you invert a face, you really make it substantially harder to recognize who the person is than when you say invert a picture of your house or a picture of your dog or something like that, right? There seems to be something different about inverting an image of a face. It inhibits the recognition disproportionately. And this has been known for a long time, this facial inversion effect, and there's lots of demonstrations of it, interesting things that can be shown about the effect. A couple of them I'll demonstrate in just a second. But what the idea is that when we look at a normal upright face, when you look at Hillary Clinton and you see her face upright, okay, you look at it and do two types of separate analyses on it. Okay. One way to recognize Hillary Clinton is to go through her individual features, her eyes, her mouth, her, maybe hairline, the shape of her jaw, that sort of thing. And another way is to look at how those features are configured, okay? How they are configured relative to each other, right? How far apart are the eyes? How high are the eyes relative to the nose? How high is the nose relative to the mouth, right? So when we analyze a face, it is thought that we do two simultaneous processes for that recognition. We look at the features and process the features and look at the configuration, the kind of placement of the features relative to each other. We do both a featural and configural analysis, and that information is available in both ways. Okay? And it could be that this fact, the fact that the brain can do these kind of parallel processes on these two types of information, is why face perception is so efficient as long as the faces are upright. Okay. Didn't seem like a big deal before, but so I didn't mention anything, but all those effects we talked about before with being able to process faces that were shown too quickly for us to have any conscious recognition of. All those effects where subliminal faces had influences on further judgments, right? Those were all with upright faces. Seems to make sense. When the face is inverted, it doesn't work like that. And what's being suggested now is that can be maybe a function of the fact that when the brain analyzes a face, as long as it's upright, okay, it's doing it with both featural analyses and configural analyses. So the efficiency, that amazing sensitivity and efficiency of face processing could be based on this extra analysis the brain's doing, okay? This configural analysis. When we look at a doggy, okay, it's thought, or when we look like at a picture of an airplane or a picture of a bicycle or something like that, we are recognizing it by looking at the features, not having a very deep analysis of the configuration between those features. That might be just reserved for faces, and especially upright faces. The configural information in inverted faces is very different, right? Yeah, I mean, the features are a little bit more difficult to recognize here too, but we can no longer recognize Hillary Clinton by analyzing where the eyes are above the mouth, where the nose is above the chin or the nose is below the hairline. When her face is inverted, we lose the ability to perform a configural analysis on her image, on her face image. Okay? When the face is inverted, we lose that ability. Okay, so basically, we're just saying inverting a face inhibits this specialized analysis, visual analysis that the brain may be able to do with upright faces, but only upright faces. Can't do it with inverted faces, and it can't do it with anything else that's upright, like upright doggies images or upright airplane images or upright bicycle images, nothing like that. And here's another demonstration of that I think you'll find interesting. It's called the Margaret Thatcher effect. And I don't know if you know who Margaret Thatcher is. There was a movie about her 5 years ago or something called The Iron Lady with Meryl Streep. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of England in the early 80s, or 80s, I think most of the 80s actually. And she was pretty controversial. She was very conservative and well, I won't get into the details of her, but you know, she was very well known for, you know, both positive and negative reasons depending on your perspective. But they've used her face in a particular demonstration to show a really interesting face effect. And this effect I'm about to show you works with more than just Margaret Thatcher faces. They can be shown with lots of different types of faces. It's been shown with lots of famous people's faces, but it's come to be known as the Margaret Thatcher effect because it is her face in this original demonstration. There she is, upside down. And if I ask you to look at these images and tell me, you know, is there anything funny about them? You look at them and maybe say, yeah, as I look at it, it seems like the images are a little different. I'm having trouble determining what the difference is. Yeah, it looks like the eyes are a little different, maybe. The mouth's a little different. Maybe it took you a little while to notice those differences or to determine what the differences were. But boy, when they are shown upright, and that is the exact same thing shown now upright, how quickly does that distortion in the image pop out at you? I mean, it's spontaneous. It is like visceral, like you have, oh my gosh, that's ugly, right? And there she is. And the idea, again, is that we have a real sensitivity to faces if they are upright, and if they are human, for that matter, too. Okay? So the kind of face-specific process might be, this is just one idea, might be the fact that when we look at an upright face, a human face, the brain is doing this extra analysis, this configural analysis that it can't do when the face is inverted, or it doesn't do when it's not a face image. Okay? These sorts of effects have been considered to be specific to faces, perhaps. And I'm not going to have a chance to get into this, but I want to leave this possibility that this actually might have more to do with expertise. because these facial inversion effects, these Margaret Thatcher effects, work with faces pretty much for everybody in the world. But they can also work for other types of stimuli with experts of those stimuli. So there's a dog. If that's a Cocker Spaniel, that's one of my late dogs, old dogs, Marley, the wonderful Cocker Spaniel. I had him when I was in grad school. If I were somebody who raised Cocker Spaniels, and had, say 30 Cocker Spaniels on my farm or whatever, and bred them to be show dogs, and I really knew Cocker Spaniels and how Cocker Spaniels features, kind of get passed down across generations, and I know specific dogs. If I have a lot of experience with this specific species or breed of dog, I then show similar sorts of inversion effects, okay, that I show with faces. So this idea of face-specific processing might have more to do with expertise with a class of stimuli. We all have expertise with faces. We all do, because I mean it conveys so much information. But some of us have expertise with another class of stimuli. Maybe some of you do. Okay, so you would show these sorts of Margaret Thatcher effects and inversion effects with stimuli that are of dogs, or if you're a bird watcher or car designer, sometimes they show these sort of things. It's interesting. But I just wanted to put that out there before we finish our discussion of faces. Okay. All right, that does finish our discussion of faces. So I am going to move here onto imitation. Okay, let's just take a second. Let me change my slides. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Funny. Okay, just give me a second. Very odd. Okay, sorry. Yes. So I'm going to move on to our discussion of imitation now. And as I said before, as I said before, this is kind of an interesting new literature. And again, one of my favorite subjects, actually. There we are. Okay, let me share my screen. And good. We should have enough time to get to where the video starts. Boy, I hope so. And good. You'll see when you go through the book, it starts off with actually an interview with a professional impersonator, somebody who's good at mimicking. It's interesting. But we get into these effects pretty quickly. Let me just change my notes here. Showing that this imitation that I've been discussing is something we all do all the time. So you already saw a really kind of cool example of this when we discussed, hold on a second. Yeah, here it is. When we discuss facial imitation, right? Okay. And that's kind of the first kind of experimental example I've talked about. But you probably have noticed this in your interactions with others. So like if you're at a party and talking with somebody, you might find yourself kind of taking on the same body language as the person you're talking with, right? I don't know, maybe the one I've been very interested in recently is when you're talking with somebody and they have an accent. You might find yourself imitating that accent a little bit, embarrassingly. Okay. I think I might talk about that on the video a little bit next class. But these are times that we're aware of this sort of thing. Of course, we're also aware of when we intentionally imitate each other, right? So when you were little, you probably intentionally imitated your siblings just to bug them. We're not really talking about that imitation. We're talking about this kind of inadvertent or unintentional imitation. And that happens a lot. And it happens subtly all the time. So, oopsie, you inadvertently imitate someone's postures, you imitate their speech, not just in the case where you imitate an accent, but when you speak with somebody, if you're a slow talker, you tend to speed up your speech. If you're talking with somebody quick, and they'll slow down their speech a little bit if they're talking with you as a slow talker. Okay. Postures is something we know about, and facial expression. You've already learned about some of the research on that sort of thing. But I'm going to be talking about this in now some detail. We'll come back to facial expression in a little while, but I wanted to talk about a little bit of the history of some of this research. And a lot of this has to do with like body language, but you'll see it has some very important ramifications that go much more deep than just body postures and body language, that sort of thing. In some of the initial experiments, what some researchers did is they took videos of students interacting with professors in their office during office hours. And so students would come in and they talk with their professors, and they were told they were being videotaped, but maybe not for that reason, just interact naturally. And they would look at instances when the student would kind of imitate the professor with their body language. So maybe the professor's crossing his arms, will the student cross their arms, that sort of thing. And what it means. Okay? So students will imitate their professor's body language a little bit when they're interacting with them during office hours, right? It's kind of a natural thing. And professors will imitate students as well. But what they were interested in is the degree of imitation that occurred and whether that had anything to say about how well the student and the professor liked the interaction. And what they found was the more of this inadvertent, kind of accidental, unconscious imitation that occurred between the professor and the student, the more likely the student and professor would say that, yeah, that was a good meeting. We had a good rapport. We got along well. Okay, maybe they say, yeah, I like that student a lot. The student said, I like that professor a lot too. So it suggests that there is this connection between the amount, the degree of this kind of body language imitation, all at the unconscious level, and how much people like the interaction and maybe like the person they're interacting with. Okay, that was some early research on this. So people thought, this is kind of cool. This really might have something to do with our psychological experience of other people, of interactions, all that sort of stuff. So this is worth studying. This is cool stuff. So they decided to study this and decided to study it more methodically. What I mean by that, more methodically, is that they are actually going to manipulate the types of interactions that can occur, as well as the type of actions that might be imitated during those interactions. By the way, these effects overall call it chameleon effects, and you probably have a sense why. You know how chameleons change their color depending on their environment. The idea here is that people will kind of change their body posture, their appearance, depending on the context of the person they're interacting with. That's just what's meant here by chameleon effects. Okay, people will change in that way. All right, so here's our first example. And it's being kind of this is exemplifying what this is. Imagine you're waiting for an experiment, and someone comes in and waits for you with you as well. They say they're from the intro psychology class that's taught at a different time, but you're both in intro psychology. You chat a little bit. And then finally the experimenter comes in, lets you into the room, and it says, welcome, we're going to have you do a very, very simple task today. What we're going to have you do is just sit down in two chairs facing each other and describe pictures to each other that we're going to hand you. And your description should be thorough, so potentially the other person would be able to draw the picture that you're describing. Okay, so it should be that thorough. Cool. All right, so you sit down, and you look at your picture and you start describing it to the person. Oh, it's a photo of a street scene, and there's a a car waiting at a red light, and there are people crossing the street, and the other person's listening and say, okay, all right, I'll remember this if I have to write it down, that sort of thing. And then you switch. The other person does the same thing, and cool. That's they say this is a beach scene. There's a beach ball being thrown around, and there's kids in the water wearing those kind of floaty duck things or whatever. Cool. I'll be able to hopefully at least draw some of that if I have to later on. Okay, and then the experiment's done. All right. You never had a draw. That's okay. But you're asked this question. Did you know that you were imitating the other person while you were talking to them? No. Did you have any idea that you were rubbing your chin while they were rubbing their chin? No. Okay. What this experiment is really about is observing this inadvertent imitation. And unbeknownst to you, the other person in the experiment was not another subject, but was actually part of the experiment. They were an experimenter that worked in the laboratory. And they were taught to kind of very subtly perform these acts. Because they're part of the experiment, by the way, they're called confederates. It's not important you really know the details of that term, but it's just a way of saying that it's a person who's kind of pretending they're another subject, but they're actually part of the experimental design. They work in the laboratory. They're actually doing the manipulation. And you're told all this at the end. It's not deceptive at the end. Everything's fine. Okay. But what the confederate is taught to do is to shake their feet a little bit. Like, I can't really show this here, but like when they're sitting, they kind of, shake their foot's off the ground, and they'll shake it back and forth like this, like that, okay? While they're explaining their picture. Or maybe what they'll do is, while they're explaining their picture, they'll rub their face a little bit, all right? And the question is, will you do those things too after the confederate did those things? And the answer is yes. You've been videotaped and they've been watching you the entire time. And as it turns out, when the confederate, okay, I see the beach scene, I see a beach ball, that sort of thing, when they're rubbing their face, okay, you would start rubbing your face too a little bit later and say something, and then when asked later, would have no idea that was the case. Okay, so imagine one group of subjects gets the foot shaking, the other group of subjects get the face stroking, okay, the face rubbing, right, like that. And you would be more likely to perform that action depending on what the confederate did. And that action is always unconscious, because at the end, as I said, you're asked these things. Did you realize that you were actually rubbing your face while you were talking? No. I didn't think I would have to pay attention to that. I was just paying attention to the silly pictures. Or did you realize that you were shaking your foot a little bit while you were talking? No, I didn't do any of that stuff. No subjects are aware of this sort of thing. None are aware of this sort of thing, okay? They've done lots of experiments in this way, lots of them. And what they find is that not only will the subject perform these imitated actions, but they'll perform kind of some of the details of these actions they're imitating, right? So if in fact the face rubbing is a little bit faster, okay, they will perform their face rubbing a little faster later on. Okay. Importantly, as I said, it's unconscious. That's a very important component of it, right? But the imitation isn't, I mean, they will imitate some of the details and the speed. They might not do it for nearly as long as the confederate did it, but they will do some of it, and they will do it with the same speed. They may not do it as often as the confederate did it, but they will do some of it, okay? It's not like a literal imitation, but it is an imitation, and it is an imitation of some of the details as well, which is interesting. So the speed of action, that's what I wanted to say. The speed of the action is also imitated. Cool. What else? Some examples of this. Some of these are really kind of interesting. There's a picture of a person on a treadmill, and in this experiment, subjects would sit down at a video monitor and be told they're going to be watching a person on a treadmill, and what they're supposed to do is record every footstep or something like that. So you have a little clicker and you push it whenever the person takes a footstep or something, okay? But you're also being monitored for your breathing as you watch the person. And that monitoring just comes from something very kind of unobtrusive. You get a little, I can't remember how they do this. They put a little band across your chest and, you know, they make up a story and say, you're going to be using that later. Don't worry about that now. But the experimenters are monitoring your breathing as you're watching the person exercise, even though you're being distracted by something else. And what happens is, as you watch that person exercise and they get faster and faster on the treadmill and their breathing increases, your breathing increases a little bit too. Not a lot, right? But it starts to speed up a tiny bit as you're watching somebody else's breathing speed up, right? So I think I say in the book, if you don't feel like you're in the mood for exercising, at least go to the gym and watch people exercise. Well, it's not certainly going to be that much of a workout, but you can't help but imitate that to some degree. And again, like all the experiments we'll be talking about today, when asked if you knew you were imitating, you'd say, nope, no idea. I had no idea what was going on. So breathing is imitated too. Something that's kind of really important, and I know about this because my wife is a real psychologist, unlike me, and she has a private practice, and she specializes in eating disorders. And she is very aware that people will imitate the amount of food they eat when they eat together, right? It's not maybe, they won't imitate it exactly, but they, if you're out with folks that are, eating a lot, you're probably going to eat a little bit more than if you're out with folks that are eating less. And that's something that really needs to be attended to with eating disorder patients, because if they're in, say, some sort of support group where they're going out to lunches together and stuff like that, if they decide, if some of them decide I'm just going to eat a very little bit today, then that's going to affect the other folks as well. Which is an important consideration. So they have to be very careful in inpatient situations that they don't, the eating behavior doesn't kind of become contagious, because that can be very dangerous for eating disorder patients. But even without having an eating disorder, it's something that we do. We do imitate to some degree the amount we'll eat. Now, of course, if you're generally a large eater, you're going to eat a lot, probably as usual. But if you're with somebody who eats less, maybe you'll eat a little bit less. You'll still eat a lot, but you'll eat a little less. Or if you're with somebody who eats more than you, then you might eat more than you usually would. These are subtle differences for most folks, and not for eating disorder patients, it can be severe. But for most of us, it's a little shift, but it is something else we do. And again, all unconscious. It all happens unconsciously. I just want to say this very quickly. It's not, I don't think this is going to be on the test. Well, I'll say it. It's in the book, certainly, so I guess it is fair game. But these need to be human actions for the most part. In other words, if this person on the treadmill was a robot and it was animated, okay, and it's still sped up, okay, because it's so visibly a robot, you're not going to breathe faster as the robot gets faster. It has to be a human, a visibly human person for this kind of automatic imitation to kind of kick in. It needs to be a human you're looking at. I'm just going to say this as an aside. That might have something to do with the uncanny valley, because there are instances where if the animation of the person running is falling into the valley, they don't look quite real, that imitation doesn't occur. If it is a real person that isn't showing these uncanny valley sort of characteristics, we will imitate, which is interesting. All right. Let's look at more of these things. And these are some of the things that I've gotten really interested in my laboratory. And I'll first go through the developmental stuff, though, that what I mean by developmental is that you, in fact, have been imitating all your life. When you were first born, there's evidence that you were imitating. At 2 weeks old, for example, there's evidence that you would imitate tongue protrusions like that. If your parents did that to you. If their face were close enough, vision isn't great at 2 weeks, but if their face was close enough, and they were sticking out their tongue, or they were blinking, or they were smiling, you would show some imitation of that. By the way, I always have to be very clear on this. This is not a 2-week-old infant. This looks more like an 8-9-month-old infant or something like that. That's kind of displaying this for this demonstration, but that's the image that was in the textbook that I borrowed. In fact, when you look at videos of 2-week-old infants, they don't seem to have that much detailed control over their facial, movements. So what you'll see is, they seem kind of random at 2 weeks, their faces, but you will see a little protrusion here and there, okay, or more blinking when there is somebody doing that in front of them, okay. Other sorts of things, speech movements, which I think is interesting. If in fact, that looks more like a 2-week-old infant there, I would say, probably, right? If in fact the infant is listening to a person say ah versus and you can see that these are very different kind of productions, okay? You will see the 2-week-old infant imitate those sort of facial configurations that would be involved in making ah versus That's a very cute little infant kind of showing that right there. They're listening to ah here, there. Now again, you don't see this kind of very clear imitation that you're seeing here with a 9-month-old infant, but you will see in what seems like a lot of random movements of their face, they will make a little bit more of this sort of expression if they're hearing an ah, and this sort of expression when they're hearing an m. I see there's a question. Let me just finish this one more point. This will occur whether the infant is exposed to the sound of someone saying ah or m, or there's somebody in front of them just silently mouthing like that. If they see it but don't hear it, they will still do that little bit of imitation that you're seeing there. So it's whether it's heard speech or seen speech on a face. Okay, well, that'll be important for the discussion you'll hear about on Thursday. Okay, let me stop here and let's see what the chat is about. Jacqueline asks, could the imitation be because the person they were talking with was a stranger, or could this work if you did it with someone you were comfortable? Yeah, that's in the book a little bit. I won't be talking a lot about that here, but there are kind of social characteristics that bear on how much imitation we do. We will tend to imitate with folks that we feel some affiliation with more, okay? If it is a family member, if it is somebody we know, if it is somebody that we have some cultural experience with, we will do more imitation. It is absolutely a good question. Yeah, there's more of that in the book. I don't think I'll be talking about it here though. All right. So now let's concentrate on speech, because this is the sort of stuff that I found so interesting that it actually started changing the laboratory work we were doing. And this has to do with how we imitate speech. So when you are talking with somebody, you imitate the words they choose, right? So, there's different words for the same idea, right? We do borrow people's words when we're talking with them, right? We imitate their syntax. And what syntax is just the ordering of words. So, you can say, the dog bit the cat, or you can say the cat was bit by the dog, right? One's active voice, one's passive voice. It's not important you know that. But it's the same idea again in both of those sentences. The dog bit the cat was bit by the dog, same idea, but the word ordering was different. So the same idea can be conveyed with different types of word ordering, different types of syntax. We imitate that in each other as well, all unconsciously. Speech rate is something I mentioned, right? We speak faster with folks who talk fast, right? We speak slower with folks that talk slow. It's a subtle shift. We don't meet exactly the same. I talk fast. I'm from the Northeast. Maybe you talk slow because you're from laid back Southern California. When we talk, I don't go way to the laid back and you don't go way to the Northeast, rapid fire speech, but I slow myself a little bit. You speed yourself a little bit. And without me ever having told you that, you may never have been aware of it. Intonation, okay, is how much pitch change we use, right? So maybe you know people who kind of talk like monotone, and maybe you know people who really like to almost sing their speech, and they go really high and then really low again, okay? Some people are more monotone, and if you're the type of person who's really got a very wide ranging pitch change, you might talk a little bit more monotone too. Okay? So in other words, one's intonation style, how much quote singing versus monotone there is in their speech, okay, will be imitated by the person they're talking to. And then finally, accent, and that's what I mentioned before. We have a study being conducted now with a group of folks in Mexico City to see if when we inadvertently imitate somebody's foreign accent, which happens, during conversations, even when we're not aware of it, we do a little of it. If the person with the accent is aware that you've imitated it. And so far, I think when I talk with somebody who has an accent and I imitate their accent, I go, wow, that was really embarrassing. Does the person who I imitated know I just did it? And the chances are, based on our early research, is they don't, which is a relief. I mean, everybody else that, doesn't have the accent might have heard me do it and they'll go, you just said that in a funny way. But the person who I imitated probably doesn't know I did it, which is interesting. Anyway, we're in the middle of that research right now. Anyway, okay, so I also wanted to spend some time talking about the fact that when we are talking with each other, we imitate the more kind of details of speech, what I'll call the fine grain aspects of speech. And what I mean about that, by that is, the way we kind of string together our consonants and vowels. Okay, so we're talking about the real details, not the syntax or the words or even the melody of speech, but how we kind of squeeze together our consonants and vowels when we create syllables, when we speak syllables. So, for example, this is going to be a little technical, but I think you'll get it and you'll have an appreciation of how kind of deep this sort of imitation is. When we produce pa versus ba, maybe you want to just do that for yourself, pa versus ba. Very similar articulations, right? One way you can tell the difference is if you kind of slow down your pa and ba and put your hand in front of your mouth. Pa, sorry, I just choked on water. Pa, ba, pa, ba. When I do that, when I say pa, I feel a little puff of air coming out my mouth. Pa, ba. I don't feel that with the ba. There's a reason for that, why there's a puff of air that you feel. When you make a pa sound, okay, your vocal cords start kind of separated from each other, so the air can rush through them. Okay? With ba, the vocal cords are already closed and already vibrating when your lips part. And this is the difference between these two syllables. And I can show you now in the graph. Okay, so this is just lip closure. So I'm going pa, ba. This is when they're closed, and this is when they're opened. Cool. This is when our vocal cords are vibrating. That's all that voice means here. Our little voice box down here. It's when those little kind of ligaments, those little things are vibrating. When I make a pa, especially if I exaggerate it like I just did, okay, there's no vibration for a little while after my lips part. Okay, my little vocal cords are kind of separated from each other, and so air can get through them. And so when my lips part, you can feel that puff of air on your hand. Pa. Even when I make a more natural pa, 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 okay, those vocal cords don't start vibrating until just after my lips are released from each other, right after they open up, when my lips open up. The lips open up first, and then the vocal cords start vibrating. When I make a ba, though, especially if I exaggerate it, ba, my vocal cords start vibrating before my lips open up. Ba, okay? And since they're already vibrating, they're kind of stopping the air. In order to vibrate, they got to kind of be pushed by the air. So they're stopping the air to some degree. And that's why you don't feel that puff of air that you do with pa. Okay. This is a cue or a phenomenon, we'll just call it a phenomenon, called voice onset time. In other words, the voice onset is later for pa. Okay, the voicing, the vibration is later for pa than it is for ba relative to when the lips open up. Okay, for pa, the lips open up first and then the voice vibrates, the vocal cords vibrate. For ba, the vocal cords vibrate first and then the lips open. Cool, you learned something about speech, about phonetics. Don't worry about that term, but you learned something about speech production. Cool. Now, here's the cool part about the imitation. We have differences in how we articulate these pas. So for example, I'm from Syracuse, New York, upstate New York, and my pas are kind of short. In other words, I don't have a lot of time here between when my voice, when the lips part and my voice starts vibrating. There is going to be some. There's going to be a little point where my lips are apart, I open my lips, and there's a tiny little piece, and then my vocal cords start vibrating. It's just from being from Syracuse, trust me on this. Versus Posh Spice. You know who Posh Spice is, right? Victoria Beckham, right? Posh Spice. So whenever I talk with her, and that's every weekend almost, and we talk on the phone about our lives. I'm kidding. I'm very aware that when she says, people still, I can't do the image, I can't. Rosenblum, people still consider me Posh Spice. That's how she talks. Right? So I feel for you. I know you're so much more interesting than that. So it's a posh. All right. When she says posh, she's speaking more like this. Posh. She's got her lips are parting first, and then she's waiting a while before her vocal cords start vibrating. She's got a long posh space. Okay. Makes her kind of sound, kind of a little bit more sophisticated than me from Syracuse, but hey, that's part of our friendship. Let's just put it that way. So we each have different ways of saying this. The extent to which we delay our vocal cord vibrations relative to when we part our lips will depend on our style of speaking. Mine is based on a dialect in Syracuse, and hers is based on a dialect in East London or something like that. I don't know, I'm making this up. Okay, that extent is very small though. It's between 1 to 1/20th to 2/20ths of a second. But here's the thing, when Posh and I speak, we actually start imitating each other's voice onset time a little bit. I never sound just like Posh. She never sounds just like a Rosenblum from Syracuse. But we move towards each other's voice onset time. We imitate this extent. We're not perfectly imitating each other, but we kind of move more towards it. The more we speak, the more it moves, in fact. Right? In the beginning, we might not be, when we get on the phone Sunday mornings and start talking, maybe it takes a couple of minutes before we really start imitating each other's voice onset time with those P's. But here's the thing, the shifts, at least, in the beginning, are tiny. They're 1/200th of a second. And neither of us are doing this intentionally, right? Neither of us even knew about this until I told her about this research, and she thought it was fascinating. She's an interesting gal. She thought this was really interesting. And now we know about it, but we're certainly not aware of the fact that this shift is just 1/200th of a second. It's as if our vocal cords and our lips are more, sophisticated about the imitation than we ever could be on purpose. I'm never saying, I heard, Posh, that the more I do this, the more you might like me, or the more you might consider our rapport is better. Even if I try that, I'll never get it down to 1/200th of a second. But our brains are doing that. Our unconscious brains that are controlling our speech articulators are matching, or not matching, but moving towards what the other person is doing. which is really cool. This is what got me into this. This is why I started doing research on this sort of thing. We've got lots of research on imitation, not only from listening to speech, but from seeing speech on people's faces and things like that. However, how are we doing here? Okay, I've got, oh boy, I'm gonna have to go through the next slide. Okay, there are things about imitation that in fact seem to play an important role both in how we interact with each other and more fundamentally how we perceive each other's actions. And the first thing I like to say is imitation makes you a better person. What do I mean by that? Well, I already said that, potentially when we're doing this, and all again, remember this is unconscious, inadvertent, unintentional imitation that our brain is doing, right? This is something that we seem to base our evaluations on the rapport on to some degree, okay? So we know that's the case. And there's a lot of research that shows this sort of thing. Hold on, let me make sure I've covered everything. Yeah, okay, let's go back to this experiment. Remember this, we're gonna use the one, it's this one, by the way. We're gonna use the one where there's a Confederate and you're the subject and you're naive that the other person is part of the experiment. And again, you're gonna be asked to describe pictures for ostensibly the same purposes you had to before. Okay, so here's what goes on. This time, what's going to happen is the Confederate, rather than creating actions, performing actions for you to imitate, instead, what they are going to do is they are going to imitate your own actions. So imagine now, that's me here. This is actually Alan Alda, the actor, but you don't need to know that. That's me, and I'm describing the pictures. And as I'm describing the pictures, this is something I'm just naturally doing. Yeah, so the beach ball, and then the kids with the rubber duck floaty things, yes, and there's a kite. There's a kite up in the sky, I see that too. And I'm doing this, When it comes time for you to now describe your picture, you'll do a little of this too, okay? You'll be kind of delayed. You'll be maybe a little bit more nuanced with it. You won't do this, okay? Maybe you'll kind of just do it a little bit more gently, okay? And if you do those things, I will like you more. I will say that the interaction we had was more successful. If, on the other hand, I was in the subject group that didn't have the Confederate performing these imitative actions, I'll say, yeah, it was okay, but it wasn't. They seemed like a nice person. But I will actually rate you as a more positive person to interact with, and the interaction itself as more successful if I have been subtly imitated. Now you can see that this is something that can maybe play a role in or what's called organizational psychology, where if you want to sell somebody a car, okay, maybe imitating them a little bit is not a bad idea, right? And this is something that's discussed. Sometimes people are trained to do this. It's unclear how effective it is when it comes to sales. I don't know if you'll be kind of coerced into buying something you don't want to buy, but you might like the person a little bit more. You might like the interaction a little bit more, and that could have a little bit of an influence over where you buy a car, right? Does these things. Being imitated will facilitate agreement, so people are more likely to agree on a topic they're discussing, even if they came in with different opinions. Waitresses who imitate both the kind of speech patterns and body language of the folks, of the patron at the tables, will supposedly get better tips. It enhances product enjoyment. So if you are asked if you like a soda, if the person is imitating you just a little bit, then you'll say you like the soda better. And it's been used in designs of avatars. Don't worry too much about that. I won't have time to talk about that right now. Critically though, all this imitation has to be subtle, it has to be smooth, it has to be delayed. You cannot be aware that somebody is imitating you for these to be effective. If you are aware, it can have can backfire, right? So if you do this and then you see the person does that immediately, You can say, I'm being imitated here. I'm being mocked here. So it has to be very subtle. It can't be the sort of imitation that you did with your siblings when you were a kid, right? It can't be like that. Okay. Also, this is interesting. Not only will you like the person that you've been imitated with a little bit, or imitated by a little bit more, and like the interaction, it actually kind of facilitates your, I guess, future behaviors towards other people, at least for a short amount of time. Here's the cool experiment. Okay, so it facilitates, what I'm going to say is facilitates positive behaviors towards other folks. And what I mean by this is the following. I call this the pencil dropping experiment. This is how you can remember it too. Imagine you've just been in the experiment that was described here in this little image above, right? You've been imitated. And you like the person, you like the interaction, but you haven't actually evaluated that. Just so far, you've been through the part where you've been asked to describe the pictures and to listen to the other person describe the pictures. And then what happens is they say, okay, we're going to separate you now and have you fill out a couple of forms, and then you'll be done. So the other, what you think is the other subject, who is actually a Confederate, leaves, and you're there by yourself. And then another experimenter comes in, and they come in with a pile of papers with about 10 pencils on the top. And as they come in, they drop the pencils. We actually tried this in our lab for an experiment, and it takes some practice to drop the 10 pencils and look natural doing so. It took a lot of practice, actually, to get the pencils so that at least some of them are near the subject. Okay? The question is, will the person help pick up the pencils? And they will be more likely to pick up the pencils if, in fact, they had just been imitated in the experiment, which is pretty darn cool. Right? That is pretty cool. So not only does it make you like the imitator and the interaction with the imitator better, but it then kind of puts you in a mood to be more helpful, to be more kind to somebody else. There's other examples of this where, after the experiment, same experiment, after the experiment, you're asked to go to a different room. You sit at a table and you say, okay, your subject money will be here in just a second. We're going to pay you $10 in singles. And you sit there, and there's a little box on the table that says, please consider, contributing some of your subject money to needy children or something like that. And here's your money. Say, okay, do you put money in it? Yeah, especially if you had just been imitated. Okay. So that's what I mean by the title of this slide. It's kind of cool. Imitation makes you a better person, in that if it's, kind of this subtle, kind of unconscious imitation, you like the imitator, you like the interaction with the imitator, and then it makes you a little bit more altruistic. It makes you more willing to kind of help others, even if you don't know who the others are, as is the case with the needy children. You'll never meet them, so it's interesting. Okay, cool. I want to make sure I can get through this in 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to go a tiny bit faster here. Not only does imitation make you, this is a tough slide too. Not only does imitation make you a better person, it makes you kind of change your kind of social stance, with other people. It can actually help you be a better perceiver. Okay, so what I'm saying is that imitation, imitative learning in particular, right, can make you see things a little bit more clearly. In some ways, this is maybe not too surprising. So when you're learning a new skill, whether it's playing tennis, whether it's playing guitar, some skill where you're, going to be imitating the teacher. Certainly, that's the case in those two situations, right? Sports music. So imagine you're learning tennis, and you're learning different techniques for forehand and backhand, right? And as you learn those techniques by imitating the teacher as they're kind of going through the motion, okay, now try this, try that, and you're watching them do it, and that's helping. When it then comes time to watch tennis on TV, okay, watching Serena Williams or something on TV, after being exposed to just a couple of lessons sometimes, and certainly as you get more into it, more lessons, you're going to have this experience more, you see tennis differently, right? You see them doing things that you didn't notice before. Also true of music. You know, when you learn guitar, you sometimes through imitative practice you're learning, and then when you listen to music, you listen to somebody perform a guitar solo or something, you can hear things, you can hear nuances that you didn't hear before. So that's kind of the intuitive way of showing this. But I also want to talk about some of the experimental ways. And this experiment's a little complicated. I'm a little hesitant to get into too much detail with this, but I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to go through it a little quickly. The book does this too, so don't worry if you don't get it this time. This is an experiment where you are sitting on a stool, and so is an experimenter, and they are teaching you a little dance with your arms. Okay, they're doing something like this. Okay, so it's, you know, maybe a little tricky, and it takes a while. You have to imitate what they're doing, and then once you get it, okay, so maybe it's something like this. Once you get it, so it's not. So there's different ways you can coordinate your arms. You can coordinate it this way. You can coordinate it this way. This is a little dance, so you're a little bit in between those different sorts of kind of coordinations. Okay. And you learn it from imitation. And then what you do is you just practice it on your own. Okay, all right, I'm going to practice this because I'm going to be asked to do it someday. So I'm going to practice this for maybe half an hour. Cool. Now, what the next step is you're going to watch a person who's going to walk across the screen, but they're going to be a really weird sort of person. Okay, it is in fact something. Oh, this is not going to work, is it? Oh yeah, yes, it will work. Okay. It is a person who is just composed of little points of lights on their limbs. Is this going to work? Yeah, there they are. So they're going to look kind of like this. But they're going to be computer generated, those points. And you're going to see them walk across those kind of points that are representing a person, walk across the screen. And your job is to watch pairs of them and say whether the first is the same as the second. But the way these characters are walking are really strange. It looks like they're kind of drunk. And that makes it really hard to know whether the first is the same as the second. And you're not going to be good at it until you see that person walking with the same coordination you just learned. In other words, you learning a very specific idiosyncratic skill is going to facilitate your ability to then recognize that skill in somebody else. So the imitative learning you've done has made you a better perceiver. There's other examples of this where what you can do is restrict imitation and show that it actually makes perception harder. Okay, so for example, facial expressions. Okay. And this is a great example. I hate to just give it a minute, but I have to. All right. So say you're given a series of pictures of a clear smile and a clear frown. But then what the experimenters did is they kind of, made in-between pictures of that person smiling and frowning. So some of these, they say there's 9 altogether. Some of the ones in the middle are very subtle, and you're not sure if it is a smile or frown. But you can distinguish them. You can tell this is more smiling than this is frowning. If your own face, however, is inhibited so it can't imitate, okay, those expressions which we know are important, and they can be inhibited by putting a pen in the mouth, or, as it turns out, the research shows, if your muscles are paralyzed by Botox, okay, you become less able to recognize those expressions. You can tell this is a smile and this is a frown, but you can't necessarily tell that these two are actually a little different. You'll say they're the same, where before you had the pen in your mouth, or if you didn't have Botox, you would be able to do that. So restricting imitation can actually hurt your perception a little bit. And there's other demonstrations of this as well, with leg and arm motions, when you're asked to tell whether this person is in the same posture from different angles. Depending on what you're doing with your legs, if you're swinging your legs or you're swinging your arms, it's going to have an effect on it. Okay. So basically, your motor system influences how you perceive. What you're doing with your body influences how you perceive. And it is in a body-specific way, meaning that if you're swinging your legs when you're looking at these pictures down here, you will have a difficult time saying whether they're the same postures if the legs are a little different. But if the arms are different, you will have no problem saying that. On the other hand, if you're swinging your arms, you'll have difficulty telling them whether the arm postures are different. So what your body is doing influences how you perceive. Okay, I think, good. I think that takes us to the next slide, which starts on the video. So let's now quickly do one more polling question. Here you go. It's another one on faces. Oh, shoot. No, wrong one. All right. Why might faces fit personalities? Why might your face fit your personality? A, because of what self-fulfilling prophecy. B, expressive habits. C, both A and B. Or D, none of the above. Go ahead and answer that. And I'll make sure I give you the answer before class is over. Cool, you're acing it. All righty. Let me just stop it there to make sure I can explain it to you. You aced it. Those of you that answered it, the correct answer is C. And as I said, if you look back on the slide, both are possible reasons why our faces might match our personalities. Think about the elderly women, and maybe they grew into their faces, their personality grew into their faces, and that's what the self-fulfilling prophecy is about. But also could be that their expressive habits, the way that they expressed emotions on their face over the course of a long period of time, change the structure of their face. Okay, cool. Take a quick picture of that. That's it. I will see you virtually, I suppose, on Sunday. You'll see me at least on Thursday if you want to watch it then. Definitely watch it though. Watch the video. It's very important. And go ahead and read everything. And good luck on your final. And enjoy the rest of your summer. Okay. Bye-bye.